Hello, Jamie from Inky&Scrappy, sharing with you today. This is the way card using that magic circle window interactive die and doing an ink blended galaxy. So I pulled out some of my Star Wars themed stamps from Ink Road Stamps and some white pieces of paper. So I think I'm using 100-pound or 110-pound cardstock. I want to say it's Neenah Classic Crest or white cardstock, but don't quote me on that one. It could also be Accent Opaque. I use them pretty interchangeably, and I don't remember which one I happened to grab. So for this one, I decided to do some Distress Oxide ink blending for my galaxy. It's an interactive, so I couldn't really use the Distress Mica spray stains, which I did not too long ago, and I was really having fun with making galaxies, and so I chose to do the Distress Oxides. It's a drier, I guess, ink blending as opposed to the sprays, and so that was kind of where I was going with it. So I started with Villainous Potion and then came in with Festive Berries and then finished this off with some Uncharted Mariner. And then of course the secret to those galaxy backgrounds, you don't have to have a smooth blend in the background. The big thing is coming in with that Distress Oxide in Black Soot and going over the whole thing. It's really darker in person. This does not do it justice at all. I think the finished photos kind of give it a little bit better look. I'm not exactly sure why it looks so light in, I don't know, on the camera on this one. So I'm also going to bring in some Windsor and Newton Iridescent Watercolor Medium. It comes in a fairly good sized bottle. I just add a few drops of it to a travel sprayer and then add a bunch of water. Shake it up because you'll have it'll settle down and sit just on the bottom. You just shake it up and it'll give it a nice, mica glossy mist. I also had some of that Dr. PH, I don't remember what his last name is. Anyways, I will list it down below, but it's a bleed through white watercolor and it sits on top of Distress inks and oxides beautifully and it doesn't suck up the color, so you don't get that. You get a crisp white, galaxy. So it's a new fave. I am bringing in my Ohuhu, mostly my Ohuhu Honolulu markers, which are the brush ones. I actually have the brush and the bullet combo, so I think it's Honolulu B. I did bring in a couple of older Honolulu Ohuhu ones, which are just the brush nib, or not the brush, just the fine nib and the broad nib, just because they're easily accessible, and I'm trying to use up my old markers before I wear out, trying to wear out my old markers before I bring in all my new ones. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. But I just pulled out some colors that I thought would work with my little character Yoda here, and of course his little spaceship or thingy jiggy. I'm sorry, I'm really bad at names of Star Wars things. My son is going to disown me. It's okay. I'm over it. So my backgrounds were a little, it took about 15 minutes to color my image and cut it out, along with stamping and all the other things. So they were fairly dry to the touch on top, or at least the water part of them was fairly dry. So I brought in some Hero Arts Yeti pigment ink. I like to smush it down onto my glass mat and pick it up from there instead of taking my white brush and going directly to my stamping ink pad, because you tend to get color transfer, and this way it doesn't color transfer. I hope that makes sense to you. You can ask in the comments if I didn't explain it very well. I understand. I'm also bringing in a Galaxy stencil. The Galaxy stencil here comes from Trinity Stamps. I don't know if they have this one anymore. I really kind of just wanted like a circle swirl pattern to kind of make it look like he was moving through the sky, and I don't know if I grasped it exactly like I wanted it. Maybe I should have done kind of like the Star Wars, or is it Star? It's not Star Wars. Well, yeah, maybe like when they're bringing in the letters, and I think I should have just done like white lines out. Maybe, I don't know. This is what I came up with, and once I started, I couldn't stop. I couldn't switch. I kind of wanted to switch, but we make it work, right? So I did bring in some of those smaller stamps from one of the other Star Wars sets. I will list all the Star Wars sets below. I think I have like 4 of them. I just don't remember off the top of my head which one this one is from. Anyways, is it the Starfighter? Is that what that image is? I'm not exactly sure. Don't quote me. Don't, like, attack me. I'm really not sure. I like Baby Yoda. I know who he is. Does that count? Anyways. So, cleaning up my mess, I did stamp that on with some VersaFine Onyx black ink because it will sit on top of the Distress Oxides. The other one to use would have been maybe like the Ranger's archival ink would work as well for stamping on top of the Distress Oxide inks. So for this one, I knew kind of what I wanted. I wanted my actual, you know, moving piece to be, I shouldn't say moving piece because it's all moving, right? I wanted my tab, that's the interactive part, to actually be on the top. And so when you're looking at these and you're like, why are you're like cutting, because right now they really didn't matter, right? I don't have any words on them. I didn't have any, so I could kind of rotate them and it wasn't top bottom sort of thing. This is where I decided I was going to stamp on this one prior to cutting because I wasn't sure how it would work after I cut it on this one. And so I did this one before the one that went live on June 7th. So if you're like, but you did it on the last one that I watched, it's because I did this one before that one. So for this one, I'm bringing in, I kind of wanted to, so you see the arrow that's supposed to be the top of your die. It's actually the bottom of my die on this one, just because I'm switching where my mechanism is going to go. So it's kind of the same, wherever you want your mechanism to be, that arrow is going to be on the opposite side. So if you chose to do your mechanism on the side of your card, you know, that arrow would be pointed to the side. So if it mattered, as per what your scene was on your base card here, that's kind of the only, you know, the only thing that you need to worry about. Like, you know, if you know where your top is and your bottom is, I guess. But so I did stamp this one with some StazOn, I think it's cloudy white ink or something like that. And then of course I did clean off my stamp with the StazOn cleaner. It's usually I do it right away after I use StazOn. I don't like the StazOn. It's a solvent ink. I don't like it to sit on my stamps. They just kind of get a funny feel to them if you leave it sit on there and don't clean it off. It is one of the only ones that I actually use a cleaner for to clean off. I did heat set the actual sentiment. I wanted it to make sure that it was dry. It wasn't going to smudge or run or fade extensively when I ran it through the die cut machine. So here's where I'm like, okay, I need to figure out where I'm lining this up for suresies. And this is why the next card I did, I stamped it afterwards. Because it's not, it doesn't end up being exactly straight, which drives me nuts. But, you know, I kind of was like, well, I stamped it on there, so I'm kind of stuck with where it's at. And so, you know, you learn from doing. And so that was kind of my learning from doing. The other thing that I learned with this one is I probably should have let those heavily ink blended backgrounds dry just a little bit more. Because I did spritz it with that one shimmer spray, so it kind of wets the whole thing. It didn't move as nicely as maybe I wanted it to. The other thing to remember to do is to make sure to line up that circle in the middle from the front and the back. It will help you to pop those in the little slots a whole lot faster and easier. This was one of my struggles on this one, you know, because when I do one, then I'm like, oh, okay, I got it. And I just think I can go, you know, sometimes I realize I have to take the time to do the steps. But ultimately, if you get that really nice looking star, that 6-pointed star in the middle of your front and then on the middle in your back, you're usually pretty good to go. I did use some anti-static powder tool as a few times on this one. So I'm going to also bring in the glue again. I just put one little teeny tiny drop on each one of those points, and then I will add that paper it's a paper brad or paper circle washer, I guess, paper washer to the back. That's what holds the front piece onto the back piece. Literally, that's all that's there holding it. So I like to use liquid adhesive for that one. Just make sure you don't use too much. That's why that little teeny tiny drop on there works perfect. You don't have to worry about it running into and catching on other parts. I hope that made sense. Then I added that brad to the front there, and then I'm just going to bring in the circle that comes with the set. It's just die cuts on there. I added it. I did not wait for it to dry. Patience, grasshopper. Jamie does not have patience, obviously. So, patience, grasshopper. Wait for that one to dry. Then start moving it. Now, I have learned, since I've been doing this one, to maybe just start it a little bit so you get that first little part through with your pull tab, and then start working those tabs, actually like the actual piece of your actual, like, I don't know, is it like a fan wing? It kind of looks like a fan there, so like work your little fan blades individually, or, you know, pull on those as opposed to pulling on the tab. It seems to help a little bit more. But because I didn't wait for this one to totally dry, I had one corner that kind of, I don't know, it kind of got bent a teeny tiny bit. And so that little teeny tiny bend in there was affecting my mechanism from actually moving fairly freely. So once I figured out where it was catching, and that's usually half the battle. So once I figured out where it was catching, I brought in that anti-static powder tool again, kind of worked that in there a few more times. And then I'm going to bring in, before I get too far along here, I'm going to bring in because I was like, how do I fix this? So I brought in my little bone folder here and kind of pressed it down and kind of got it to fold back where it was supposed to be, and then it worked fine. So troubleshooting at its finest, right? So here I am just making sure that it's still going to work, and then I'm going to add in my image onto the circle piece. I think this would be super fun if you had something that could rotate around and it would look cool. But of course, you know, because I'm like, it's rotating. I don't want him to rotate. I want him to stay straight. So, you know, of course I'm going to have to play with it, right? Yeah, we'll get there. I wasn't positive what I was doing on the tab yet, but I wanted an extra piece that was going to kind of pop up and be a little bit more bold. So I'm using a scrap to kind of cut a piece out of there. Well, I decided I wanted something on the bottom here, and so I didn't have a planet looking die cut. So I'm bringing in a circle, well, kind of a circle. So a hillside die. I didn't want the stitching. I didn't want any of that. And I just kind of came in and drew some craters that are sticking up. And then I'm just going to hand cut that out with the scissors. Nothing too fancy, but I did it on the back side, so then the front side doesn't have any pencil marks or markings on it, and I can just come in with, I just came in with some distress ink, that black distress ink, to kind of give it a little bit more character, darken it in spots so it kind of blended in with the background. Now, I wasn't too worried about the sizing on this one because I planned on just kind of putting my foam tape around here and then cutting off what was overhanging. So keep in mind, if you're going to do this, you need to make sure you're not in the way of your moving tab piece, and then make sure you pop it up off of the base so it's not going to hinder the movement of those, I'm going to call them fan blades because I don't know what else to call them. So make sure it's not going to hit any of those fan blades by using a little bit of foam adhesive tape or double-sided foam tape to kind of pop it up and out of the way. Then I just flipped it over and cut off any of the overhang. I know, real technical, right? So once I was done with that part, of course, I waited until this point because I really didn't know where it was going to end up on my card. And so I waited to add the sentiment until right here. If I'd have gone down a little bit further, it probably would have stamped okay. I just ended up bringing in, so where it didn't stamp properly, I just brought in some of that foam adhesive sheet and popped it underneath there, and it popped up that part enough to let me stamp it. If it wouldn't have worked, I could have come in with a sentiment strip to cover it up and make it work that way. Sometimes I get lucky though. So I brought in that tab, kind of reinforced it, and I was like, but it's still kind of like, I don't know. Just, I didn't know what to put on it. So I was like, well, I have the little, the little fighter things. And I was like, well, what if I do that? So I brought in that stamp, stamped it twice. I shouldn't have used VersaFine because I was using alcohol markers, but, you know, I don't always think things through. So I was very careful with my coloring on them. And then I'm going to actually bring in a second piece of scrap, and I'm going to cover that up on the back here. If you had die cuts, you could definitely just die cut too, and then layer them. That would work fine. But since I was going to have to hand cut, I just layered one sheet of paper on top of the other and went that route. Yeah. So I'm going to snip off the ends. I didn't cut the little V pieces out here because I thought it would end up making it, they were just going to bend and fold then, right? So this way it had a little bit more stability. I did bring in that second one and just cut that V out, so then I could come in with my sponge daubers here and just kind of add a little bit of color to make them match a little bit better. Yeah, I know I was a little off there. It still drives me nuts. Anyway, so they matched a little bit better, and this way I could throw it on there and I didn't have to worry about those little V's kind of breaking off or bending over and catching on things. Yeah. So for this one, I'm bringing in some double-sided foam strips here. Now, keep in mind, this one, my mechanism is a little bit further north than, or onto the top, than my other one was. So you see where my tab is moving. I need to make sure that I'm going to clear that and not have anything in the way of it moving. So when I did my foam adhesive on the top part here, I had to be a little bit more careful and just make sure that I wasn't actually going to hinder the movement of that tab. So as you can see, it freely goes from one side to the other here. And so I'm all good to go. So I'm going to pull off my backs here, add some liquid adhesive, and then I'm going to, you know, take my fingers and do, yeah, so I held it to see if it would work. So I could hold it where it was going to be steady, and it worked. So I'm like, well, here's hoping. So I added a drop of glue onto that back piece. My thought was, if it didn't work, I could probably get it to release. You know, I'd have to go in with like a thin spatula or something and kind of get it to pop off the top of the card front so it could move again. But it ended up working, so it was good. So then I just need to try it, make sure that it works. It worked, and he stays straight, which I was really happy about. So yeah, there is my, oh, I'm not done yet. I have to add some distressed glossy accents. Oh no, glossy accents, that's what they are. So I added some glossy accents, of course, to the, I guess, the glass part of the little ship. And then that is my completed card for today. This is the way. Of course, may you always be Baby Yoda on Speeder Happy. And I love you. I know. So have a great one. Take care. Bye.